Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise, connect the dots, and deliver the insights you need. Today, we are wrapping up a really intense analysis. We're diving into the final five key predictions that are defining the outlook for China in 2026. Our mission is, well, it's to see how these interlocking gears of the economy, demographics, and governance are all predicted to grind together in the coming year. It really looks like a convergence point.
Interlocking is exactly the right word. Look, these predictions, they aren't just hypotheticals, they're symptoms. We've been tracking the data, the steady decline in foreign investment, the massive local government debt through 2024 and 2025. These are real structural pressures, and what these predictions do is basically map out where the system is most likely to crack under the strain.
Okay, let's unpack that. I think we should start on the external front. Prediction number one we're looking at is the acceleration of foreign capital withdrawal. We're moving beyond just, a few companies leaving to a systemic retreat, a real money flight.
That's precisely what the data confirms. And the scale is.
Mm.
Well, it's startling. The trend really became systemic back in 2024, when China recorded a net foreign direct investment outflow of $168 billion.
A net outflow. Hold on, can you explain that distinction? Because that sounds far, far worse than just a slowdown in new investment.
It is. It's a whole different ballgame. A net outflow means that not only did new investment dry up, but the amount of capital actually leaving the country, through selling assets, repatriating profits, it exceeded any new money coming in. And just for some historical context, that $168 billion outflow was the largest recorded capital flight since 1990.
Wow, okay, that puts it in perspective. But why are we so sure this is strategic de-risking and not just, say, a natural economic correction? I mean, a 27% drop in total FDI, which we saw in 2024, can sometimes just be part of a normal cycle, right?
That's a critical question. And if it were purely economic, you'd expect a rebound, or at least for things to level off once, say, growth picked up. But the total FDI absorption in 2024 dropped 27.1%. That's the biggest drop since 2008 and didn't stabilize in 2025. Through the first 11 months of 2025, FDI was down another 7.5%. The fact that it just keeps going down, that tells you the trend isn't cyclical. It's structural. It's strategic.
So the drivers are strategic, meaning global powers are making a conscious choice to pull back, to diversify their supply chains. How did we see that play out in the material we reviewed for 2025?
We saw very concrete moves. For example, you had joint statements from the EU and Japan, both of them emphasizing supply chain resilience and, crucially, reducing their strategic reliance on China. And it's not just talk. The EU launched a huge $3 billion ledger strategy aimed specifically at reshaping key supply chains. They're targeting critical materials like rare earth metals, where their dependence is highest.
Right, and you combine that with Japan's push through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the U.S. friendshoring initiative. It all paints a very clear picture of global realignment.
So if this is set to accelerate, what does the prediction say about the long-term consequences inside China?
The prediction is that the net FDI outflow could blow past $200 billion in 2026. Firms are finalizing their moves to places like Vietnam, Mexico, and India. And the real hit isn't just about lost factory jobs. It's a hollowing out of the advanced part of the economy. It means fewer R&D centers, fewer specialized technical roles, fewer regional headquarters. That whole transfer of technology and know-how it slows to a crawl. And that threatens their entire economic model.
That is a huge external drag. It shrinks the whole national income base. Okay, let's pivot from that to an internal challenge that's going to do the same thing: demographics. The next prediction covers the demographic shockwave, and it's about to hit primary schools. We all heard about the kindergarten crisis, but that was just the initial tremor. It was the perfect leading indicator. I mean, look at the numbers. Over 2024 and 2025, nearly 50,000 kindergartens closed. Just vanished. Enrollment fell from a peak of 48 million in 2020 down to 36 million in 2024. That's a 12 million child drop in just 5 years.
It's hard to even wrap your head around 50,000 empty schools. What happens to all those buildings? Are they just sitting there?
In many cases, yes. They're physical assets built for a population that simply didn't show up, and those children who were not born are now moving, or rather not moving, through the educational pipeline. The national fertility rate is hovering around 1.0. That's less than half of the 2.1 needed to replace the population.
And the timing here is everything. When do those kids from the biggest birth rate drop start hitting the primary school system?
They hit in 2026. The children born in 2020, right when the birth rate fell off a cliff, they're turning 6 this year. So the prediction is that the peak closure trend is going to shift very decisively from kindergartens to primary schools.
What's the scale of primary school closures we're expecting for 2026, and where is this going to hit the hardest?
The forecast is for over 10,000 primary schools to close. And crucially, these closures won't be evenly spread. They'll hit central, western, and rural areas the hardest. The impact is twofold. You have immediate teacher unemployment, and you get all this wasted educational infrastructure. It's a vicious cycle, really. A shrinking youth base today means fewer taxpayers tomorrow, which puts incredible strain on the services needed by the rapidly aging population.
Fewer taxpayers tomorrow, and already crushing debt today. That demographic point flows perfectly into our next challenge, the internal fiscal strain, the local government debt crisis. This is prediction number 8, fiscal deterioration leading to instability.
Right, if demographics are shrinking the revenue side, debt is absolutely consuming the cash flow. The official audit looking at 2024 data showed local government debt had reached, well, a staggering 380.9 trillion CNY.
380 trillion. Can you help our listener get a handle on that number? Is that manageable, or is this just existential?
It's enormous. It's an existential figure. To put it in perspective, 380.9 trillion CNY is roughly over $53 trillion USD. That one figure is larger than the entire GDP of the European Union combined, and it puts the local government debt rate at 79.4%, almost 80 cents of debt for every dollar of local GDP.
And it's the local governments carrying most of this burden, not the central government, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Local debt is 63% of the total government debt. Overall, the country's debt-to-GDP ratio has jumped 77.4 percentage points just between 2014 and 2024. And while Beijing has offered some debt swaps, around 10 trillion CNY, that's often described as just giving a homeowner a new credit card to pay off an old one, it doesn't solve the underlying income problem. A lot of the hidden debt is left untouched.
So when budgets get squeezed that tight and local governments have to prioritize just paying interest on their debt, they simply lose the ability to deliver basic services. What are the predicted consequences for public stability?
The financial pressure immediately eats away at public services. We're expected to see acute strains, potential delays in essentials, like Social Security payments, healthcare. The sources predict local debt rates could push past 80% in 2026. At that point, servicing the debt becomes so all-consuming that it actively compromises funding for social stability. You literally can't afford to hire police or maintain roads when your debt payments swallow everything whole.
So if the budgets are breaking, what does that do to the morale, the actual performance of the people running the government? This leads us right to prediction 9, administrative decay, the rise of the lying flat administration.
This is the bureaucratic response to starvation. Lying flat, Tangping in this context, means passive, complacent, slow execution. When you have civil servants under immense pressure, with shrinking funds and increasing scrutiny, their default behavior is often to just minimize risk, to avoid taking any action at all.
And we've seen high-level concern about this. I'm thinking of that case in Zhejiang in late 2024 where they disciplined 8 cadres for procrastinating. But that doesn't fix the system, does it?
No, because the problem isn't individual laziness. It's a structural paralysis. It's caused by fear and a total lack of resources. Take the 2025 Hangzhou tap water incident. It's a perfect case study. Residents in one district reported their tap water smelled like sewage, it was changing color, had sediment. The official explanation was algae decomposition.
But the real story wasn't the algae, it was the response, the handling of it.
Exactly. The slow bureaucratic handling of what should have been a basic public health crisis, it just exposed these deep systemic efficiency problems. A government with enough resources should be able to test, notify, and fix the issue quickly. When budgets are this tight, basic maintenance doesn't get funded, and civil servants, they're afraid of making a costly mistake, so they prefer to do nothing slowly rather than something wrong quickly.
So we have a very clear chain of causality here. Economic decay leads to fiscal contraction, which puts pressure on civil servants, which fosters this lying flat culture, and that ultimately just tanks policy execution and public services in 2026.
It's the internal engine just seizing up.
And that brings us to our final prediction, number 10, which really ties all of this together. It's about regional divergence and the risk of instability in the most vulnerable places. These pressures, capital flight, debt, they're not distributed evenly across the country.
Not at all. They're magnified in the regions that are least able to generate their own revenue. This is where the idea of fiscal self-sufficiency is so important. In 2024, the average county-level fiscal self-sufficiency was only 38%.
Only 38%. Can you break that down for us? What does that mean for how a local government runs day to day?
It means that for every dollar that local government spends on services, hospitals, schools, roads, they only generate 38 cents themselves. They have to rely on the central government for the other 62 cents in transfer payments. On their own, they are fundamentally insolvent.
And when the central government is also stretched thin dealing with all this debt, those transfers are under enormous pressure. So how do these regions try to fill that gap when they can't wait for the money from the center?
This is where you see desperate, sometimes arbitrary measures. For example, nationally, revenue from fines and forfeitures actually dropped a bit in the first half of 2025. But the sources noted that in some of these specific low self-sufficiency regions, that same revenue saw these abnormal dramatic surges. It strongly suggests they're just resorting to random fines on local businesses and people to fill the budget holes, just to keep the lights on.
And the final projection for 2026 in these fragile areas?
These are the regions that face the highest risk of what's being called government dysfunction. It's a powder keg, really. You have high debt, low income, and arbitrary fines all converging. This is expected to lead to interruptions in public services, which in turn leads to a higher risk of social instability. Protests, incidents. The fiscal gap just blows up the regional divide.
So we've covered the final 5 predictions, and they form this grim convergence. You have strategic capital flight shrinking the tax base, the demographic collapse hitting the schools, a crippling local debt crisis, administrative paralysis, and finally, a heightened instability in the most vulnerable provinces. 2026 is shaping up to be a critical year, really defined by these deep structural challenges.
It's a profound test of governance.
Right.
Every one of these pressures reinforces the others. Capital flight hurts the tax base, demographics strain public services, and both put stress on local budgets that are already broken. The key takeaway has to be that treating these as isolated problems just won't work. Any policy has to address the structural nature of this decline, not just the surface symptoms.
That's a powerful summary. Now, for our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to think about. Given that the root causes of capital flight are strategic choices by foreign powers, and the roots of administrative decay are debt and demographics, what is the most immediate and effective policy lever that a regional government, one that lacks fiscal self-sufficiency, can realistically pull in 2026 to mitigate social instability? Think local, think immediate, think necessity. That's your deep dive homework.
Thank you for joining us.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.